Hello, everybody. My name is Zach Frank, and this is Some Patches Required. Here with me, we've got
Aaron Mana, as you have had with you for the last 2 weeks. Well, technically 4 weeks, but 2 episodes.
I'm gonna be real honest. Part of me really wants to restart that, but I feel like we kind of should keep it because of how just amazingly awkward that pause was.
Yeah, no, it was real good. I think we will just cross our fingers and hope it was endearing.
I think we can go with that. So
Yeah.
I'll ask. Oh, I was gonna say, Aaron. I was gonna ask the magical question of how are you today, of
Well,
all days?
in our last episode, I kind of gave a monotone and glib response about how everything was great and the world was a very friendly place. And then everything got wicked terrible for like a day or two. So I'm not going to talk about that. Instead, I'm going to say fine.
All right. I mean, I guess that's better than when people tell you that they're doing like good. At least it kind of alters it up. Of course, I guess fine's kind of one of the just okay ones. But to be fair, it's also really awkward when people are like, "How are you today?" And then you get the response like, "I am miserable and life is an eternal abyss of sadness."
Yeah, I
Like,
like
oh.
if I'm somewhere where I'm forced to interact with other human beings and they say, "Hey, well, how are you?" I kind of just cycle through living the dream, every day's a gift. Uh you know, just as many kind of platitudes as I can manage. But there was an interesting piece of gaming news, and I do not know your opinions on this yet,
Oh
but
no.
this
Is it another KFC related thing? Because I tweeted about that and no one liked it and it was kind of depressing. I made a like Jurassic Park reference.
I do wicked wish that it was KFC related, but it's not. It's Star Wars.
Oh, is it the
Star
Lucas
Wars.
Games thing?
Yes.
Ah, bring it
So
home,
I
Aaron.
so backstory. Disney buys Lucasfilm, which owns LucasArts, the game company that makes the games, gives exclusive publishing and development rights to EA and EA owned studios. Most of the games are extraordinary failures. And following that, a great number of the movies were either high profile box office flops or dead to fans on arrival. And there's a whole conversation to be had about whether that's valid or not, but we'll just skip that for the moment. And where we have arrived is now there is something called LucasArts or Lucasfilm Games, and it will be publishing all of the upcoming Star Wars games instead of EA. So they accomplished nothing
I
by dissolving LucasArts.
Yeah, I was literally about to say like this already existed before, I feel like, and it did. And we literally just went, it goes full circle. It goes full circle. Oh
They
boy.
they managed to they managed to mismanage the property so hard that the only thing they achieved was renaming the publishing house. Now, theoretically, Lucas Arts or not Lucas Arts, which is now not anything. Lucasfilm Games is no longer is has not yet released any specific information about what that means for EA's development exclusivity.
Mhm.
And the key difference is that Lucas Arts was an in-house development team. So there was a staff of developers who worked specifically for LucasArts to make those games. I sincerely doubt that that's going to be the case with Lucasfilm Games. I think I'm getting that naming right. Yes,
I'm pretty sure
Lucasfilm
that's right.
Games.
Yeah,
I'm on the Star Wars website, and it is Lucasfilm Games. So yeah, it really does just seem like it took them nearly a decade to get like right back to where they started, which is almost
Well,
almost a perfect analogy for how the films have gone under Disney's stewardship.
well, wait, Aaron. You know what the saying is? Is it's not about the destination; it's about the journey. And oh boy, has it been a journey.
Hmm.
So, I think you're looking at this whole thing the wrong way. Sure, we started with what we ended, uh, in basically the same place with the same logo and looks like the exact same company. Sure, that might seem confusing and pointless, but it's about the journey. We got two Battlefield games. Okay, actually, like not being a jerk about it, I actually do think that Jedi Fallen. So I've heard a hot take that maybe you don't like Jedi Fallen Order. I thought it was a pretty decent game. And to EA's credit with Battlefield 2, they did come out with a lot of cool content for it. But I will admit that generally speaking, there has been a lot of mishandling of the IP. And yeah, no, it's been a journey. I don't think we could say that wasn't the case.
I would say that the first Star Wars Battlefront was a competent game that should have cost about $25 maximum. There was so little content in it that it was not a $60 game. I did not play Battlefront 2, partially because I was so burnt out on Battlefield 1 and didn't see there being much difference aside from the single player campaign, which I think was only like 4 or 5 hours. Fallen Order was fine. Fallen Order was
Just like
of
my day.
yeah, it was fine. The moving felt fine. It, like most other third person action games in the last 6 7 years, had the exact same combat system as every other game. It, like a great many of the games that came out in the last couple of years, borrowed Souls-like elements. It was fine. I Unfortunately, the movies had been so thoroughly mismanaged by that point that I wasn't interested in the story nearly enough for like the cool moments to be anything other than just like, oh, there's that one, there's that
Yeah.
Jedi, oh yay.
See, but you're missing out on the best part, which is the massive selection of ponchos that are now at our disposal in the
That
store.
is true. In fairness, I will acquiesce and state that there were a great many ponchos, and they were all different from each other. They were all still
They
ponchos,
were all
but they weren't the
textured
same
differently.
poncho.
That was one of my favorite comments from one of our friends who recently just beat the game, whose name will remain anonymous for his own protection. But anyway, it was when he was unlocking different things, and I remember him saying over the Discord, "Why is everything a poncho? Can
It's
I
all
get something that
ponchos.
isn't a poncho?" It's
It's
like, no,
all ponchos.
it's all
I
ponchos. Always has been. Sorry, I had to
I
name up.
I will admit that the lightsaber customization was satisfying to me as a child who grew up on Star Wars. But yeah, no, it was just like I think some of it is also just personal bitterness in regards to the fact that almost immediately after Lucasfilm and the entire thing was sold to Disney,
Mhm.
Star Wars uh 1313 got canned, and 1313 looked so fucking good. It looked so good. And it seems like some of the bones of 1313 found their way into Fallen Order, which, now that I have said that sentence out loud, does sound slightly grisly and unfortunate. But a lot of the framework that I think was built for Fallen Order, or for 1313, found its way into Fallen Order. But I don't know. It was fine. I actually think, for the most part, it's the best thing that EA managed to do with Star Wars IP,
Yeah.
unlike, and get ready for one of some patches required's patented graceful transitions,
Oh Lord.
Battlefront 2's nasty loot boxes.
Are you trying to translate Battlefront 2's nasty loot boxes into the subject of discussion for today, which you'd be forgiven for thinking is Star Wars because it's not. It's
It's wicked
possibly
not.
the furthest away from Star Wars that you could be.
Yes, that is exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to offboard from Star Wars to a Genshin Impact.
Yes,
Gracefully, as I said.
which is a story about a young female or male character that are siblings in a I don't even know. I was trying to like make it sound Star Warsy, but I don't there's it's not about Star Wars. I'm sorry. I just like have butchered this so horribly at this point that it's cringe. So yes, Genshin Impact is the game. It is Chinese. It is not Star Wars. It's not even the same genre for those that don't know. I hate everything I just said.
Yeah, no. So that was I much like last week when I dropped the KF I didn't actually drop a KF console on Zach, but I dropped the unforgettable knowledge that the KF console does exist onto Zach's metaphorical consciousness and whatnot. That was a terrible sentence. I did not bring up the Star Wars thing either. This time I think it was less funny because there was no compartment in this concept that keeps your chicken warm. But yes, our main topic of focus this week is going to be Genshin Impact, which for the two people on the planet, well, there's probably a lot more, frankly. That for the people who do not know what it is a basically it's a cross-platform sensation. I feel like that's fair to say, Zach.
Yeah, it's also a Breath of the Wild clone. I'm joking. We'll get into that. But yeah, that's one of the topics. I mean, I think when we were trying to formulate this idea, there's a ton of different articles out there. Unfortunately, a lot of the ones were how to get different characters or what is the best build for this character, which obviously for the way that we run the show is not very helpful. But one of the big things that I think drew me to the topic initially when Aaron and I were discussing what we wanted to cover for episode 3 is there's an article about, and actually we'll just start here, I guess, Aaron. There's an article, and let me get the exact title for you. Did Genshin Impact swipe an opportunity from under Nintendo's nose? This is an opinion article by Rob Fahey at gamesindustry.biz. And this has really kind of grabbed my attention to it because, per your point, Aaron, it's an incredibly successful game. Grossed, I believe it's just on mobile in the first 2 months, over $400 million. And it is in some ways very similar to Breath of the Wild.
Yes. So, a little bit of backstory for people who may not be familiar with Genshin Impact. It was announced at some point, the date of which I do not have readily available, but it is a game that takes place in a stylized open fantasy world that isn't visually particularly different from Breath of the Wild in terms of environments. It shares a couple of different mechanics like landmark based exploration. So, for instance, in Breath of the Wild, you see a weird skull as you're gliding down from a hilltop, and you have to assume that there's something over there. There's the ability to glide. There's the ability to climb almost anything. And then there's the appearance, which is kind of that soft realism mixed with cell shading, and it even before its launch, everyone was comparing it to Breath of the Wild. So we were interested in talking about whether or not. Well, first off, I mean, we were interested in talking about why the game was successful, but also whether or not, to start the conversation off, it actually is a Breath of the Wild clone, which is something that was levied at it almost relentlessly in the couple of months before its launch.
Yeah, I think to your point, anyone that looks at the game could be forgiven for thinking that because of the kind of like simplistic texturing style. And I feel like the landscapes look very similar. The biggest difference, I think, kind of immediately is that Genshin Impact is obviously an anime game. So, in that way, there is a very large stylistic difference. Zelda does not look very anime, at least not to me, whereas Genshin Impact does. Also, I think the funny thing is that when you climb up things in Genshin Impact, or a lot of the ways that like the stamina bar interacts with the game, it's literally the same design stamina bar from Breath of the Wild. In terms of being like the circular green bar that like depletes as you climb up things. So they didn't do themselves any favors if they were trying to not look like Breath of the Wild.
Well, which I think brings up So I guess right now what we're talking about is kind of the onboarding into the why was Genshin Impact such a massive hit conversation. And to that point, I think that the aesthetic similarities to Breath of the Wild weren't by accident. I think that in my opinion, Breath of the Wild is one of the most innovative games to come out possibly in my lifetime. I think that it took open world games, a genre that was becoming kind of stagnant under the stewardship of Bethesda's and Ubisoft's, who just kind of come up with a formula and then do very little to change it,
Mhm.
and made it feel like you were genuinely on a journey to discover things. You look at your objective, you turn around and go the opposite direction, and you're going to find something worth your time there. You're going to find something that captures your imagination. You're going to find something that makes you curious. So drawing inspiration from Breath of the Wild is not a bad thing. And to Genshin Impact's credit, I think that it doesn't actually take that much from Breath of the Wild. It's clearly inspired by it on a visual level, and it clearly draws influence from the climbing and the gliding and the stamina, which is, like you said, basically the exact same graphic. But it sets itself apart in the combat, especially, and in the dialogue system to some extent.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and then there are other things about it. And just to kind of tie a little bow on all of this, I've been playing a fair amount of Immortals: Phoenix Rising, which is another game that has been compared to Breath of the Wild basically nonstop since the game was first revealed. I just hit something. Since the game was first revealed, uh, uh, God only knows when. And Immortals: Phoenix Rising, in my opinion, lifts considerably more from Breath of the Wild on a mechanical level than Genshin Impact does. Because Genshin Impact has this combo slash elemental combat system that reminds me a little bit more of Final Fantasy 15 than
Yeah.
anything that happened in Breath of the Wild, whereas Immortals: Phoenix Rising has a significant resource that's meant to upgrade your stamina bar that you can only get by completing vaults of Tartarus, which are essentially Sheikah shrines.
Yeah, I was gonna say that seems very similar to Sheikah Shrine, but yeah.
Yep, it's literally that. You can climb everything. You can sneak. There's a godly power that you get that lets you pick things up, basically just like the Sheikah slate does, where you can like pick stuff up and throw heavy things.
Mhm.
Um, and the progression of the game is almost exclusively lifted from Breath of the Wild. Now, in fairness, it does differentiate itself in a number of different ways. Like the entire setting is basically a satire of the drama that went on with the Greek with the stories about the Greek gods.
Mhm.
I almost just said it like it was a real thing that happened, but
The
but
historical events that occurred, amount of
yeah.
them that are 100% factual.
Yeah, but it does pull a lot more than Genshin Impact does. The weird thing is, I feel like Genshin Impact has received a fair amount more press, possibly because Immortals: Phoenix Rising was buried under the release of two other massive open world Ubisoft projects that were released within 3 months of it. So
Yeah. Well, I think to like your point, I mean, basically it's the idea that both Genshin Impact and Immortals were basically marketed as or at least the way that I would see it is that both of the games were marketed as Breath of the Wild-esque games because Breath of the Wild sold so well. I think too there's been a real hunger for a second Breath of the Wild, which we have seen a teaser for. But I think they both kind of fill a void. For example, and this is something that one article that I mentioned before about Nintendo kind of goes into. They're prior to Genshin Impact, was no Breath of the Wild-esque game that you could really play on a mobile device. There wasn't a Breath of the Wild-esque game that you could really play on PlayStation. Now with both Genshin Impact and Phoenix Rising, you've got two games that kind of fill that void a little bit. Now, Phoenix is not on mobile, I don't think, right? That's only going to be like your Xbox, PC, and PlayStation, I think,
And
right?
dare we hope the KF console.
And dare we hope the KF console. But yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised if this was 100% just them saying, hey, that game was really popular, let's follow that thing. I mean, we've seen that so many times with like battle royale games. But to our one discussion earlier, which is not recorded, I don't know that that's necessarily always a bad thing. I know we had a bit of a discussion around like, is it horrible that these things were copied? In the case of Genshin Impact, to your point, the combat is so drastically different and focused on characters and combining elements and elemental attacks that it's basically just looks like Breath of the Wild. Everything else is very different. In the case of Phoenix, like we talked about, it's a completely different setting. I'm a huge nerd for Greek settings. I personally think it's dope that there is a game that's like Breath of the Wild in that kind of a setting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I grew up really digging. I mean, like one of the movies that I remember watching with my family when I was a kid was the original Clash of the Titans with like Harry Hamlin, and
Yeah.
it's the Ray Harryhausen did stop motion for the Kraken. So yeah, no, like I grew up on all that stuff, and to its credit, uh, which feeds back into this, Phoenix is actually a good game. It's a fun game. There's nothing wrong with it, and I don't think that taking inspiration is the same thing as being a ripoff, and we've seen that 150,000 times just over the course of the outgoing generation of video game consoles with Souls likes,
Yeah.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Dark Souls in quotations rip-offs. That's like a billion games now. Even Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order takes a lot of inspiration from Dark Souls-esque mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess I should just say from software like mechanics, because now they have three different IPs that all basically have the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're all good. I mean, I'm terrible at them, but they're good. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, when a group of developers and one company can come up with an idea that is so immediately successful and so immediately resonates with people who play the game, a la the Dark Souls combat and leveling system, or Breath of the Wild's visuals and open world exploration, then I don't think that there's anything wrong with taking those ideas and applying it to your own project. You can't have intellectual ownership of a concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, looking back through the generations of video games many times before, someone came up with the idea first. Everything is just iteration. So I think
Yeah.
that those comparisons are valid, but they shouldn't invalidate what each individual game does well.
Yeah, and I mean, especially, I think if, well, one, I think it drives innovation, right? I think that's like a really big thing. If things are not hidden behind, you know, IPs and copyright, then there's the ability to improve upon different things. So, like you mentioned, Dark Souls games. I think there's a lot of Dark Souls spin-off games that are fairly successful. Some of them I like more than others, etc. But in the case of looking at Breath of the Wild, you know, if there was a monopoly, or if it was just like, no, you absolutely can't make any games even similar to that, we would potentially have missed out on games like Genshin Impact and Phoenix Rising, which, I don't, I guess now I own a Switch, but I know plenty of people that don't own a Switch, or maybe they're not able to own a Switch. And I think that, having them have the ability to play a similar game, even if it's not exactly the same, and experience those kind of mechanics, I think that that's important. And in a lot of ways, I haven't played Phoenix Rising, but you're innovating on those previous games and coming up with new ideas that are cool. I think the BR genre, battle royale genre, is probably the easiest way to illustrate, going from
Yeah.
things like Player Unknown to Apex Legends to Spellbreak, which is one that I actually just started not too long ago, and like watching all those iterations is really cool. But to wrap that around to our original thing, it definitely was a marketing strategy, at least in my opinion, and I think that that probably did play a big role into like getting this out in front of people. Because to your point, I don't think when people call something like a clone, it's generally a positive comment. But as they say, there's no such thing as like negative publicity, and I'm sure in the case of Genshin Impact, being a Chinese company that is so like supposedly making a clone of a Nintendo property, I could easily see that bump them to the top of a lot of headlines. And I think that's what happened because, not to get into the political side of things, but China is commonly known for their particularly weak copyright laws, and a lot of the kind of like there's an Overwatch clone, but it's like much
Yeah.
more of an actual clone that came out of
Yes.
China. So, I think, it's kind of smart on their behalf, if I can talk today, to copy a successful game, because it got a ton of publicity and it looks like an anime game, which is going to sell a lot. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just a smart idea given some of the pitfalls that I think they probably would have to go through being a Chinese developer.
Yeah, yeah, and I also think just because on the off chance that one of our, as I believe I stated in the first episode, millions and millions of listeners is unfamiliar with this aspect of the games industry, China is not known for having an extraordinary video game output, especially when it comes to having games that are particularly successful. And so the developer, which I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but I think it's MiHoYo. There's some weird capitalization in there that makes me wonder if I'm doing that terribly bad. But I feel like MiHoYo and the developers who are working there needed to jump a higher hurdle than a lot of other companies do to make what is ostensibly a JPEG, and a JPEG. Oh my
A
god, a
JPEG.
JRPG, a
it's a
JRPG.
it's an image file.
No, I was on the verge of making a good point, and then I stabbed myself in the shin. They well, that was really good. They ostensibly were trying to make a JRPG, but trying to publicize that and get it into anyone's brains before it was released was probably a little bit more difficult, being a Chinese developer. So I think that leveraging the, maybe one or two of the mechanics and the visual style in everything but the character designs, because as Zach said, the character designs they're straight anime. They're anime realized in third person. The game, the character models almost look like even more anime-ish characters from Persona, running around the world of Breath of the Wild. And I
Yeah,
think that visual language was almost certainly a way to break through the barriers that they knew that they were, coming up against.
yeah. I think the one thing I would maybe add to your earlier point about some of the hurdles that they'd have to overcome, I think I personally don't know if Chinese developers have a lack of success within China itself. But to your point, I feel like maybe a more accurate comment that I would feel more comfortable on my end pushing is like they definitely are not successful in the West. Like the
That's
West does not
Yes,
have a
I
lot of
agree with that.
successful Chinese developers. In their country, I wouldn't be overly surprised if there's more success because China is one of the largest gaming markets right now, which is why we see a lot of like Blizzards and stuff really trying to appease China. But yeah, no, to your point 100%. I mean, I think there's just some natural like tendencies, at least in the United States, to be kind of averse to Chinese software. And so I know when the game came out, I mentioned this to you, Aaron, there was a lot of concern about whether this would have some kind of a backdoor into your computer. It does not. There's nothing that suggests that it does. But the reason that that concern was raised is because a game that isn't made by a Chinese developer but has stocks or has been invested in by Tencent is Riot's Valorant, which has a anti-cheat in it called Vanguard, which does have access to the kernel level of your computer. And there's a whole bunch of tech mumbo jumbo in there. But anyway, but it basically means is that it could be a security threat to your computer. And so there's a lot of concerns about that coming from companies that are invested in by Tencent, but also just Chinese developers in general. So sorry for all the boring, I feel like businessy side of things, but I feel like that kind of is some of the additional concerns that like Chinese developers probably face trying to have success in the West.
Yes. No, and I would like to circle back just very, very briefly before we move on to our next thing and say 100% agree with you. I did not mean to say that Chinese developers are inherently unsuccessful, but that breaking out of their market for a variety of different reasons, especially into the West, is something that we haven't seen, at least on this scale, in a great long while, which I guess brings us to the point that Genshin Impact is huge.
It's not a small game, that's for sure.
It's also enormously
nothing
successful.
Yeah, I mean, what are some of these awards? We kind of hinted at it earlier. I think maybe you found some other metrics than
Yeah, I mean, first off, it did win mobile game of the year from, I want to say, maybe it was the Game Awards, but specifically on iPhone, not on Android.
Oh, you're talking about
And
Apple. Yeah, the Apple it won iPhone Game of the Year. Yeah, they apparently differentiate between iPhone Game of the Year, iPad Game of the Year, and Apple Arcade, which is incredibly confusing.
it is a tricksy one. But yeah, it won that. It's only so far, to my knowledge, and based on my research and Zach's research, publicized its mobile earnings.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything on anything but mobile.
Yeah, and at this point, it has earned, the last report that I saw was over $400 million, and it snags an average of about $6 million a day, which is almost $6 million more than I make every day.
Wait a minute, you're not a millionaire. You're not raking in millions and millions of dollars.
Not yet. I didn't get the fancy rock from Wonder Woman, so I
Oh,
can't
oh
just yet.
darn. I haven't seen that movie, so I don't know that reference,
Don't
I don't think.
don't. It's 2.5 hours of your life that you could spend doing another thing. But yeah, I mean, like the game is making an astonishing amount of money,
Mhm.
and this brings us to some extent into one of the big conversations around the game and why it is kind of polarizing, which is how it makes that money. Because the
Mhm.
game is free to play on all platforms.
Yeah, but it's got a pretty hefty amount of microtransactions in here, which I remember I commented to you. Some people are definitely not very fond of it. It's really funny. Out of all the like different articles that I have, I've got one that's like praising the game from PC
Mhm.
Gamer. The article called Genshin Impact is astounding, so I'm sure you can tell what their opinion is, and that's by Steven Mesner. He like had a massive amount of praise to say for the game and basically said, yes, there are microtransactions in it, but they're pretty unobtrusive. I think it's very interesting because then you see that, right? And then you've got other articles, and I'm trying to find that one that I had the quote in
I want to say is
and
Mike
shared with you.
Fahey or
Yeah, Mike
Fahey.
Fahey. That's right. Yeah, Mike Fahey at Kotaku in his article Genshin Impact wins Apple and Google Play's best game of 2020. I mean, he's very just cynical in that article. So it's very interesting to see how some outlets like PC Gamer have people writing articles about how this is an amazing game, microtransactions aren't that bad, and then you've got other people like Mike Fahey saying, in quote, that Genshin Impact is a greedy free-to-play grind with big opportunities to overspend.
And for okay, so the crux of this situation rests upon the inclusion of two mechanics that I generally hate and are extremely common in free to play games. Because as much as I would like to live in a world where you could just make a game because you wanted to make it, and then if it made money, that was cool. If it didn't, then that was fine. You cannot spend as much money as was clearly spent to develop this game without expecting to make it back. So the crux of the argument focuses on multiple forms of currency, some of which need to be purchased with real money, and gacha mechanics. And a brief explanation of gacha mechanics, if you're not familiar with the term, is basically think about one of those little slot boxes that you would see in, maybe a restaurant or a grocery store when you were a kid, and when we were all going to those places without being terrified. um, and you'd put a quarter in and turn a little dial, and then something would pop out in a little plastic bubble. That is the essence of what in Japan was called a gachapon machine. You put in a certain amount of money, a thing comes out, and it's all randomized. Gacha mechanics in video games eventually evolved to the point where you would spend specialized forms of currency to try to gamble, essentially, for high level gear or characters. And that is what Genshin Impact does specifically for characters. And it can lead to a lot of overspending if you're the type of person who is susceptible to gambling, or has an addiction to that sort of thrill.
So I just want to comment. I did not know. So the origin of the gotcha game is from a gachapon machine, or is that just a coincidence that those two are?
No, I mean, that to my understanding is that it did come from gachapon machines, and I
Oh,
think
that's
the
cool. I didn't know that.
gachapon, weirdly, I think gachapon actually drew its name, according to an article that I read from here, which is on Inverse and was written by Danny Paez. Gachapon was originally named as such because of Gachapon was not named was not the original name, but the name was made by the sound of pulling a lever down, and then when it goes up, or no, when the capsule pops out. So I guess I should probably just quote the article, because this is a person who knows what they're talking about. The name was inspired by the two sounds made by Shigeda's machines, the guy who made the first Gachapon machines. The gasha or gotcha made by their hand cranks, and then the pawn when the capsules drop out of them. So that's where Gachapon came from. It was basically dictating the sound that came when you would pull the lever down to try and see what little toy you'd get in a capsule.
See, that's interesting because I always assumed that the name came from. I know this is a bit of a diversion, but I just thought this was. I always assumed it was gotcha mechanics because it's like, ha, we gotcha, like we got you to spend money, but it's not. It came from something else completely. So that's Anyway, the more you know. The more you know. I didn't know that. That's a cool little tidbit of information.
It is. I actually also thought about it the exact same way you did until I read this article. So well done, Danny Paez, or however you pronounce your name. You wrote a good article, and I apologize if I didn't say your name right.
And to your point, back on track, I think it is interesting the diverse amount of opinions when it comes to microtransactions specifically, but also gotcha mechanics, because it is a serious topic. It's always a weird thing to talk about. I feel like I don't know what your opinion is, Aaron, but it's always a weird topic because it clearly does impact people fairly negatively, and I think that as dehumanizing as the term is, it is kind of colloquially used. That was a horrible way of pronouncing that word. But whales, they refer to people that spend a lot of money on games as whales. And so the idea is, that you won't have everybody spend a bunch of money on these mechanics, but the people that do have particular issues with spending money, whether that be due to gambling addiction or maybe they just have too much money to spend, will kind of get preyed upon by games, even potentially Genshin Impact, right? So you've got people that, you've got the common saying, which is like, oh, if it's cosmetic, I don't care. If it impacts the game, then I do care. There's other people that are like, absolutely no, gacha mechanics or microtransactions at all. So it's a very weird spot to be, because I think I share an opinion with you, which is, this game was made clearly with a lot of money. They need to earn revenue back. So, they've got to have a way to do that in some way. Obviously, I don't want people to be taken advantage of, but it's to your initial point, it's definitely a hot topic around the game. A lot of polarizing opinions about this as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're 100% in agreement about the fact that a game that was released as a product needs to make money back for the people who made it, right? It's different if you're, one of the friends we had in college who released a game on, itch.io and just did it to do it because they wanted to, learn a new skill and then get feedback from people. They never had any expectation of making money. A game of this scale was clearly made to turn a profit, for one reason or another. So that has to happen if you are going to make the game free to enter. Then it does introduce a lot more challenges. My opinion is that there does have to be a balance, because in the wake of and this is why I tried to make it the bad transition. In the wake of the Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box situation.
I think you mean surprise mechanics, by
I'm
the way.
sorry, yes. Pride and Satisfaction as well, I think, was the there was legislation introduced to ban that kind of thing. And the article that I'm looking at right now for The Verge, I want to say uh, this one is referencing Battlefront. Of all people, guess who? Senator Josh Hawley, who, if you know who that is, you know why I am surprised that this is the person who was taking this action. And if you don't, then uh, look up what happened recently. Announced that he would be introducing a bill banning manipulative design features in video games with underage audiences, including the sale of loot boxes. So when all of the Battlefront 2 stuff came out, people were so up in arms about the fact that you needed to either spend money or deal with ridiculously low drop rates for any resource of any notable value,
Mhm.
that the game was essentially mathematically forcing you to spend money. And that feeds into an ethical question of, are we just retitling gambling? Because you can repackage gambling as a Star Wars game or as a flashy Chinese game that looks a lot like Breath of the Wild but plays differently, and that's a legitimate concern. But I also think that it's worth mentioning that, for my own part, granted, I have not played, 100 hours of Genshin Impact. I played it for maybe a couple, 10 hours over the weekend that it became available on PC.
Mhm.
And I never ran into anything that would force me to pay money to progress effectively. But that, I don't know. I think that sets it apart to some extent. But I also can't speak to how long that feeling would last were I to play it for 30, 40, 50, 60, however many more hours longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think like an interesting point with this game that I'll openly own up to, I think I can admit for both of us is that neither of us have played this game for hundreds and hundreds of hours. So to a degree, we're kind of limited in our knowledge directly with the game. But to your point, the amount that I played, I definitely didn't run out of content that would continue to press me forward. Uh, like well, one, I mean, we have notes here breaking down the mechanics that you do need to pay for, or not the mechanics, but the microtransactions, and none of them actually prevent you from playing the game.
Yes.
And I think this ties into our initial whole inquiry of like, why is this game successful? Well, yeah, it has a bunch of microtransactions in it, but none of the microtransactions are the same as what we see in a lot of mobile games, where it's like I liked your way of putting it, Aaron, and this may literally be what it's called. I just don't play many mobile games, but like an energy meter. Like you're
Mm.
not depleting a resource by playing the game to the point where like you log into Genshin one day and it's like, oh, sorry, can't jump on your character because you don't have enough energy or you don't have enough tokens or whatever. Like all of the microtransactions in this game are typically for unlocking the rare characters, which may have better abilities in the game. I didn't dig into that all that much, but typically it'll be for like the rarer characters or the better gear and that kind of a thing. So it's more of the grind component is behind the paywall and speeding up the grind component, but it's not like you can't play the game.
Yeah, yeah, and that's in the conversation that we had prior to this recording. I mentioned like I cycle through mobile games. It's just something that I can play when I'm in bed trying to fall asleep or when I'm taking a shit. You know, it
TMI, Aaron, you poop. Jesus Christ.
sorry, I didn't mean to talk about my poodles. No, but they're generally let me put it this way. Generally speaking, when you purchase a mobile game, you know that you're getting a game that will not de-incentivize you. You know that you're getting a game that will not stop you from playing it because you played it wrong. So you look at a masterpiece, in my opinion, a masterpiece like Monument Valley or Monument Valley 2, and you do pay $1.99 or $2.99 for it, but you can play it. You look at uh, any of the 8 billion games that are like build your town gardenscapes, and every 15 levels will give you the pull the pin puzzle that we told you was the whole game. And you can do 6 Bejewel ripoff puzzle levels, and if you go through all of them, your energy meter's gone, and then you either have to wait an hour, 2 hours, or whatever, or pay money for a different type of currency. And I did not run into that at any point in my time with Genshin Impact, which was admittedly surprising to me because even though at the time I was playing it on PC, I had initially planned to play it for mobile before we talked about it on this podcast, but the download file size was 8.5 gigabytes.
Whew.
And I wicked do not have that much space free on my phone because I bought the cheap one because I needed to.
That's
Um,
capitalism.
and and for some reason, cell phone makers stopped giving me fucking SD card slots for expandable memory. So that's another thing.
That's why,
But
Aaron.
yeah, I mean the so to my knowledge, the only thing that I've seen that microtransactions do in Genshin Impact outside of potentially addictive or exploitative gacha mechanics, which could result in people who may be at risk to gambling addiction or just that type of behavior in general,
Yeah.
um, is the or children, in fairness, or just children in general who don't fully understand what's going on when they just say yes, mommy's credit card security code is
Make
606.
things appear on screen. Yes,
Yes.
I spend money.
um but other than that, the only thing that I've seen kind of echoes what you said, in that it is the grind mechanic, or the element of grinding to level up is what's leveled behind, because the only super depletable resource. I think is it resin? I want to say it's resin. Yeah, it
I mean, there's
replenishes. Because there are, and this
there's a
this does drive
bunch.
me crazy. There's like 5,000 different types of currency, and that is one of my least favorite things that's come out of the last 10 years of video games. You can read my manifesto about how much Assassin's Creed Unity pisses me off when I finally get around to finishing it. It's currently around 35,000 pages, and I've written none of them, but I will sometime. But yeah, resin is one of the types of currency, and you have to spend resin in order to access certain activities, I believe, that give you an opportunity to get high level characters or high level gear or better rewards. And that does like it does replenish itself over time. I believe it's 15 hours to fully replenish a full stock of resin, and that is straight out of the mobile game design handbook, because that's,
Yeah.
oh, it's one energy slot out of 5 or whatever to go on this hunt with your bad gun to kill that deer in 3D Hunter XL Magic Mike XXX.
Oh boy,
Ooh.
Magic Mike.
No,
Yeah, no, I
but
agree. I mean, I think that is a pretty typical thing, is having a bunch of different currency systems. I mean, to your point, there's resin. I'm just kind of scanning through this. There's resin, there's stardust, there's star glitter, which is different. There's Genesis crystals, there's primo gems. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm sure it would be much more simple if we both played the game and interacted with these systems, but like you don't see these typically in like free to play games. Typically, the more currencies there are, you do typically see them in I would say more mobile and games that want you to spend money.
well,
Uh,
well, I mean, but the problem is that is free to play games.
no, and yeah, I mean that is or sorry, did I say free to play? I meant pay to play.
Oh no, you did say free to play, but
Oh, that's my
it's all
bad.
good.
No, I meant games that you pay money for. Generally, like your CODs. Well, sometimes now they have a currency,
Yeah.
but typically there's not as many in there. And to tie back to, I think the point that you and I both shared initially when covering this was that that lack of that energy system perhaps is why having all these microtransactions hasn't been such a huge, I guess, negative for Genshin Impact in terms of like being in the West. Because I feel like it's taken off way more, at least in my circles, which tend to be less focused on mobile. And I mean, part of it's the anime thing. It was with a lot of people when I was playing Final Fantasy 14. So they already like anime. So naturally, that's kind of like prone to get them excited. But I also think it's just the way that the loot boxes are kind of hidden. I think you actually mentioned it to me. You don't get spammed with ads to spend money very much in this
Yep.
game, which
Yep.
is like really surprising for a game that has a pretty big, I mean, like, even if it's not as maybe predatory as some things, it's still got a pretty big in-game economy is not the right word, but like microtransactions component, to put
Yeah,
it
yeah,
poetically.
yeah. I actually think, I mean, its in-game economy does encourage you to interact with the real world economy of paying them. Um, yeah, no, I did mention that. I think that it really is. So here's I'm trying to come up with something like a synthesis of ideas that can try to accurately represent how I feel about this game, because I genuinely did enjoy the time that I spent with it when I was playing it, and I was not trying to prepare for a podcast while every version of the game I could get was taking 8,000 years to download onto my respective systems. I really did feel like it was a AAA game. Visually, it presents itself as a AAA game. The audio, including the remarkably beautiful score, and even the voice acting, it feels like something you'd see in a AAA game. The side quests and the characters that fuel those side quests are better written than some of the main characters in Wonder Woman 1984.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
it's It's an absolutely wild experience to know that theoretically I can play this game completely for free. And it may just be the result of the fact that I didn't get far enough into it to get to the point where the microtransactions do become intrusive to my progress. And it
Mhm.
may also be symptomatic of the fact that once those type of mechanics tend to enter my games, I tend to leave those games. But I really did feel like it was, and I'm going to paraphrase one of the articles that you found for reference, Zach. It feels like a game that you. Oh no, Genshin Impact feels like the kind of game where you'll spend money because you want to, not because you feel obligated to.
Yeah.
And that was from Stephen Messner again from PC Gamer. I never felt pressured to purchase anything, which works well for me because I almost never pay for that kind of stuff in mobile games or free to play games in general. And
Mhm.
it really does feel like this weird crossroads where I have to kind of like dig into my own opinion and say like, is it exploit, are these mechanics exploitative? Maybe, but not for everybody. Is it a good game? Yeah, I think so. Is it a Breath of the
Mhm.
Wild ripoff? Well, probably not, but it's definitely inspired by that. And
Yeah.
then is it worth your time in general? And I'm just kind of stuck at like, yeah, probably. And I think all
Yeah.
of that kind of came together to make it almost like a perfect storm of the ability to capitalize on people's tendency to, you know, indulge microtransactions, and also the opposite side's tendency to decry the very existence of microtransactions.
I think, I like that you bring up the AAA point, and it's sad because we're running out of time in terms of
Yeah,
like we're trying to keep these to an hour, but I feel like we didn't hit on that as much as we should have, because I think the real thing that attracted us partially to this topic was, yes, that Nintendo article was kind of cool, even though it went a completely different direction than I thought it would. But it's that it's this game from a developer that's like largely out of nowhere. It looks triple A. Everything about the marketing of it is very triple A, and it's free. And not only is it free, but the microtransaction side of things, at least to the extent that we've both played, is largely not in your face all that much. And compared to certain things that you're used to on mobile, isn't as predatory. Um, and I think that the polish of it to the point of it looking like a AAA game. I don't think we need to go into too many details about that. Just look at it; it looks amazing.
yeah.
I think Aaron will vouch. Yep, right
Yep, I
there.
vouch. I vouch.
The music is really good. The writing is pretty solid. But it's the marketing, it's the microtransactions not being, I think, as in your face as
Mm,
certain mobile games. The fact it's on so many platforms, I think the fact that it looks anime definitely attracts a certain audience. And it's free, which is always positive. And then, I mean, even on the aesthetic look, it rode on the coattails of Breath of the Wild. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that made this game successful, at least from my opinion, Aaron, is that it followed up a very popular game in the West. For better or worse, it got a lot of publicity, whether that be good or bad publicity is more what I meant by that.
yeah.
And it just got in front of people. I think it just got in front of a ton of people. And yeah, it's not, the new hot topic right now. This game I think was really big 2 months ago. But I think your figure that's in the one article, 6 million a day. If you break down that 400 million over a 2 month period, I mean, it's bringing in money on mobile at least, and you could assume that it's also bringing in money on PC and consoles. So yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to say that this is not a successful game. It's won a lot of awards, and it's just very interesting. I feel like there's nothing quite like this that existed prior, at least not in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the ecosystem that allowed for this game to exist and the ecosystem in which it exists is almost singular, right? Because I remember when I was in college and I was taking game design courses, and my professor said how much money Rovio, who made Angry Birds, was making every
Yeah.
day, and a couple of us were like, "Oh no!" and the professor was like, "Why? They built that in 99-cent increments. They made
Yeah.
a game that you already play. I'll bet most of you have it on your phone." And all of us went, "Oh, beans, we do." um, but a game, to my knowledge and in my experience, a game of this size has not been released for free with so few intrusive um, demands for payment.
Yeah.
And it's not just the size; it's also the quality. Again, I couldn't speak to the quality of the overarching story or every side quest, but it reminds me a lot of the way that Gravity Rush feels. If any of you have played Gravity Rush, the characters are all very distinct. They all have things that you want to do, except in this case, it's a complete open world, not just like weird little floating city blocks. And it really is kind of wild to me that this game is free and does not demand money from me. Now, there is an argument to be made that that aspect of Genshin Impact is normalizing potentially predatory gacha mechanics and randomized loot boxes, which are basically gacha mechanics, and 8 million different forms of currency and microtransactions and all the rest within AAA games. And my opinion on that is that it's really just too early to say whether that's the case. The AAA industry has shifted the way that they've handled microtransactions away from loot boxes to some extent,
Mhm.
and basically just renamed them and made them slightly less prevalent. And I don't know if this game is going to change that or change anything. It's hard to tell if anything is going to change anything in the games industry. But yeah, it's kind of a wild experience to follow the way this game came to be and how it ended up being so successful. And it's kind of wild to speculate what it might mean about the industry moving forward, whether
Yeah.
that's good or bad.
And my actual last note, you just actually made me think. There's a ton of free to play MMOs that are pretty huge. I'm now just realizing upon us saying there's not anything like it, but for some reason this does feel like a very different game to me. I think Aaron than like any of those MMOs that pre-exist, and so I feel like it's almost the idea that this new genre of game that's like a Breath of the Wild can be made free to play and still be as huge as Breath of the Wild. MMOs, I think, are always intrinsically bigger. I feel like a lot of the time they do limit you a lot with their microtransactions. So I would still make the argument that Genshin Impact is very different than a lot of those games. But listening to you talk about it, I was like, wait a minute. There's a ton of free to play MMO games. They're big, but it definitely feels like a completely different beast
Yeah,
entirely.
I mean, I would have to defer to you on MMOs, because that's more your shtick than mine. But yeah, I mean, there's a billion free to play MMOs. There's a billion free to play battle royale games that are all extremely. I don't. I hot take. I don't care for Fortnite.
Oh no.
I
Get off
I
my podcast. Get
ah
off our
beans.
podcast now.
I, I tried. I'll just pack up my bindle stick and walk away. No, I sadly, I tried playing like 2 matches of Fortnite, and I've never felt older. I'm 25 years old. I've never felt older in my entire life than when I was trying to play fucking Fortnite. It was just teens dancing, and why am I building this? How do I build? I don't get. I felt it was I don't care. I do not enjoy Fortnite. I did win one round of PUBG Mobile, but that's because I'm 99% sure I was teamed up against bots. Um, and so, but the battle royale genre has a million really polished. I think Apex Legends was free, right?
Yeah, no, almost every battle royale is free.
Valorant,
Yeah.
Valorant's free. I mean, the battle royale. Well, I mean that's why PUBG started dying is because it cost fucking $35 or whatever. But yeah, I mean there's been a million different games that have come out and are free, but and allow you to access the majority of content for free. But
Mhm.
I have not seen a game like Genshin Impact that's to a pretty strong degree story driven be produced at this quality for that price being $0, and then that $0 price tag not limiting your ability to progress through the story at what I would consider to be a reasonable pace to the point of my experience. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think as a wonderful closing comment that I have before we give thanks to people in our usual fashion is that I don't think you've lived life in the 20th century, or at least the like 2010 late 2010s, until you've seen your neighborhood children or maybe children when you're eating dinner Fortnite dance in front of you or outside your door, and that's when you know that your life is truly complete, is when you see the neighborhood children
Oh,
Fortnite dancing on your lawn. um
I
you don't know how wonderful life is until you experience that. So
oh
with that
fuck.
wonderful closing remark on my point, Aaron, you know, I gotta be fair. Do you have anything else to add before we sign off today?
Um sorry. I'm just I the asp the the image of me flossing should never find its way to the world. I do not believe there is any photo documentation of such an event, but were there to be, um, it would certainly be terrible because I was born with one left foot, uh, which then the right foot is also very bad. They're just very bad, and I can't do things. So, no, I've got nothing. I would like to thank Beach Girl for providing our intro and outro music. You can check them out on Spotify, and you can find a link to their channel on Spotify in the show notes below.
Yep. And then I would like to thank eDougie Art. That is eDougie Art for our wonderful logo. You can find them on Instagram and Etsy under the same name. So thanks, everybody.
Uh, Thank you to all of you. I apologize for trying to make a joke about myself flossing and just face planting really hard, much like I would do while I'm flossing. My name is Aaron Demana.
This is where I just like pull you off stage with the back of an umbrella, like in the
Yep,
cartoons.
yep, yep. I would appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
But what's your name?
Oh, it's Zach Frank. I already said that.
Oh, you did? Oh, beans. Well, okay, the umbrella's coming. Goodbye, everybody.